Hi, friends. I am so very excited to introduce our guest, Pastor Tom Wojnarowski, which I probably totally butchered his last name. He is originally from Cleveland, Ohio, the oldest of 9 kids. He grew up as a PK, and for those who don't know, that's a pastor's kid. He is a proud husband of his beautiful wife, Jessica. They have 4 amazing kids: Tommy, 13, Caitlin, 10, and twins, Isabella and Jacob, who are 7. He is an emotionally traumatized but loyal Cleveland sports fan and a die-hard Ohio State Buckeyes fan. He is a proud veteran and spent 10 years in the U.S. Air Force as an air traffic controller. When he is not working or spending time with his family, he enjoys exercising and doing various DIY and woodworking projects. His passion is his family and helping people grow as individuals and as followers of Jesus. Thank you, Tom, for sitting down with me today as we talk about why having faith in God is sometimes difficult.
You are welcome. Excited to be here.
Yeah, so could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey of becoming a pastor? So, your dad was a pastor. Was
Yes.
this always the goal?
No, a big no. In fact, I think I was 19 or 20 years old, and my dad actually talked to me a little bit about it because he's like, Tom, I see gifts in you, and I think you would make a great pastor. And I was like, no, I don't think that's in the cards for me, Dad. I just told him straight up I did not want to be a pastor. So I actually worked construction for a while, then went into the military for a decade, and it was really the last probably 2 or 3 years in the Air Force that God just started messing with me. I was doing really well in my career, and I had ambitions to become an officer. And so I had some folks that were going to really help set me up for that and everything. So I started the process, and then at the beginning of the process, it was like I just hit like a wall. It was really weird, and I can't really explain it to anyone. I just knew that something was blocking me from moving forward. So I just felt like this thing on me that was just like pushing me to pray this like radical prayer of, God, I don't know what you want me to do, but I'll do whatever. And it was kind of scary in the moment, like oh my gosh, what's going to be the answer to this prayer? But I couldn't get away from it. I really felt like God was just impressing on me to keep praying this. And I can't go into all the details because it would take a couple hours to tell the full story. But so after a few months of praying that prayer like daily and just coming before God with that, there were just a few things that happened that it could only be God, and just some conversations that I had, some dots that were connecting where it was like, okay, this isn't, I'm not making this up. Something's happening here, and it's pointing towards something with full-time ministry and leaving the military. And quite honestly, I remember at the time, my pastor, he asked me if I'd ever thought about, ministry and being a pastor. And I even told him the same thing I told my dad, no. And in the back of my mind, I was like, I somehow knew that even though I was saying no, that basically that's where I was headed. So I'm not going to say it was an easy 2 years, because I really got over the next 6 months or so, since I really knew that's the direction God wanted me to go in. The next few months or so, I got a lot more clarity in that. So I kind of knew, okay, this is the direction we're going. Now it's time to start making plans to exit the military and all this, which for anyone who's done that before isn't always fun and easy. And military feels like a big safety net and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, man, am I doing the right thing? So I want to say that the last year and a half or so in the military was easy because I knew where I was going and I knew that was in God's will, but it was actually very tumultuous emotionally for me and for Jessica. A lot of questioning if we were doing the right thing, a lot of ups and downs, just emotionally, spiritually. I really feel like there was spiritual attack on our life, but here we are. We made the exit from the military almost 2 years ago now, and it's been great. And even in the past couple of years, there's still times where I question, like, is this really for me, God? Because it feels weird. It's not something that I would say I'm a specialist in, but I know God's given me a heart for people, and he's given me some different gifts, and he's equipped me over the years for some different things. And he's also placed me in a great church where I have some great people around me that are helping to support and develop me. And it's been a good journey, and I know there's a lot of journey left to go. So
Yeah, that's a huge leap because my husband's military.
yes,
So I know a huge part of that is your identity
yeah.
is within your career, and especially being in it for 10 years and then having that struggle. I can only imagine all the emotions and things that were going through your head, but it sounds like a wonderful journey. And I am really excited for just talking to you a little bit before and then going over of what we're going to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
There's no doubt in my mind that this is where you're supposed to be, because even last night when I was going through it, I was telling my husband, I was like, oh my gosh, this is some good stuff. Like, I was like, this is stuff that I need to hear personally. And I'm like, this is going to be good. So I'm really excited that you went the way you did.
Awesome.
So tell us a little bit about the church that you're involved with.
Yes.
And what type of church is it? And
so the name of the church is Northwood Church. We're down here in South Mississippi. The first campus is actually here in Gulfport, Mississippi. I mean, we're only a few miles from the Gulf of Mexico, and we actually have 3 campuses right now total, and we're about to launch our 4th here in a few months. Well, Lord willing, in a few months, because, I don't know when this podcast is going to air, but we're, right in the middle of the pandemic right now and everything. So that's kind of on hold a little bit. But yeah, we're a non-denominational church, but, I would describe ourselves as life-giving. We're more progressive in our style, but I would say we lean more towards a traditional sense as far as our doctrine goes, and we're very Bible-based. We preach the gospel every single week. I would say we're a great mix of different denominational flavors, but it's if you were to come to our church from pretty much any mainline denomination, you would find things that you felt comfortable with. But it's a very unique church. It's an amazing church, a lot of health. We've never had any church splits or scandals or anything like that, and that God's really had his hand of blessing on this church for a long time. And I came onto staff of this church in a place of transition. Actually, our current lead pastor, his father was the lead pastor for about 25 years. And so the church transitioned to him just a couple of years ago. Actually, no, it's almost 3 years now. And in this time of transition, I transitioned out of the military. We're transitioning as a church. It's been a big season of transition, but there's some exciting things happening at our church. And we're really excited.
Yeah, I told Jessica, I was scrolling through Facebook on Sunday, and I got a glimpse of her singing, and I was like, wait a minute. And I scrolled down, and it was your guys' live worship service. And so I watched a bit of it, and I definitely get that sense of what you're saying as far as welcoming.
Yeah.
Just watching that first bit, I loved it. And that's what draws me personally. Mm-hmm. So I can understand from that bit. So let's just dive into our topic for today.
Yeah, let's do it.
So could you define faith for us?
So I'm not going to lie, when I saw this, I was like, man, can I come up with some kind of cool definition? And I was like, no, I really think the Bible has the best definition, obviously because it's the Bible. And so I'm just going to go straight out of the Bible with this. This is right out of Hebrews 11, which a lot of people have dubbed the faith chapter or the hall of faith. And the first verse in that chapter, it says this: now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. So I kind of want to break that up a little bit. So there's 2 things I kind of like to note in this verse that have to do with faith. But first I kind of want to say this real quick, that faith is something that's not always based on fact or our senses, the things we can taste, touch, see, feel, hear, all these kind of things, or even scientific reasoning. I think a lot of people get hung up on, if I'm going to have faith in something, that I have to have it proven to me first, and so that really hangs up a lot of people. But here's what this verse, the Bible, is actually describing faith to be. So the first 2 things we see there that I want to point out is the word hope, and then that phrase not seen. you're talking about hope, you're talking about something that's more in the future. It's not right now. It's something that you're hoping is going to come to pass. And usually we don't understand that. None of us are fortune tellers. We can't see into the future as much as sometimes we would love to. We can't see into the future. So a lot of times we have to be driven into the future with hope. And, if we don't have hope, then, that's a really sad place to be. I always, one of the things that breaks my heart the most for people who don't know Jesus is the fact that they're living life without any true hope. And when they look into their future, it's like, man, what does somebody conjure up as to, what your future is going to look like, and without being solidified in something. And I think that's why having faith in Jesus for me has been such a big deal, something that grounds me, something that keeps me rooted and able to have hope. And then that second phrase, not seen, sight, I think when I think about our senses, when it comes to proving something, when it comes to actually looking at something and saying, you know what, that is actually a fact. I believe that right there. A lot of times we're driven by sight, because we have phrases like, did you see that? Or I got to see it to believe it. These kinds of things, and it's like sight is what drives proof. So what happens when we have things that we can't see, or things that are outside of like the physical dimension that we can interact with? And, all of us know that there's something else out there, but we can't see it. So how do we interact with that thing that we can't see, or that we can't really, all of our other senses, we really can't touch and get a hold of it? That's where faith comes in. So that's the first two things I want to pull out of that definition is hope and things not seen. The next thing, and actually let me say this too. What's interesting is that even though this verse says that faith is something that's based on a conviction of things not seen, the Bible actually then goes and talks about how we can acquire faith from hearing. In Romans 10:17, it says, so faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ, which we know to be God's word, the Bible. So I just want to throw that out there too, because, there is a sense that we have. It's hearing, it's our spiritual hearing. It's something that God has given us the ability to do. And when we read his word, one of the things that is so amazing about the Bible is it's a living, breathing document. It's something that when we read it, it speaks to us if we have an open heart. So there is a sense that we have that does help us to grow our faith. But the other two things I want to pull out of there are assurance and conviction. Assurance and conviction. So, faith, it's at the end of the day, it's a deeply rooted belief. And this is something that I've had to say to myself, because it's probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I would say I went through about a 4 or 5 month crisis of faith, where I got a hold of some information. A couple guys that I worked with shared some articles with me, and it sent me down this rabbit hole of like atheistic thinking and agnostic type thinking, and, questioning God and all this kind of stuff. And as I was reading it, it's like, man, my faith started to actually shake a little bit. And one of the things that one of the phrases that I pulled out of that, and that I really have held on to, and I've shared with a lot of people, is that we all have faith in something. When I was in my crisis of faith, I started having thoughts like, you know what, maybe it's better not to have faith. I just want to be able to like believe in something that I can like manage. But that thought process, and I believe this was God that was guiding me through this thought process, was that even if I don't have faith in the God of the Bible, whatever I choose to believe is going to be an act of faith, because whatever we say we believe about life or our future or eternity, however we define that, it's all based on faith. Even atheists at the end of the day, they're making a faith statement when they say there is no God. Mm-hmm. When they, like there's no way to definitively prove that. So you're making a faith statement. You're making a truth claim. It's based on something. Yeah. So they're stepping out in faith. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on a couple things. I really like what you said in Romans as far as having faith in hearing, and then we're able to see the Bible, read the Bible, and have that speak to us. I've never heard that before. And I think that it speaks to me, and I'm sure it could speak to a lot of people, because I think that's one of I think out of everything that I've heard, the biggest challenge with faith is not being able to see. Like,
Yeah.
how can you believe in something if you can't see it? Or, you know, some of the things that you mentioned. And so I wanted just to highlight that a little bit, because I think that's huge with having it's just presenting us again with something that's more tangible.
Yeah.
Having the Bible in here. And one of the coolest things while I was at Liberty is they have a museum of Bibles.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if you know this.
No.
I'll have to send you guys some pictures that I took, but it's Bibles from the 1400s.
Yeah.
It's like the craziest thing. And it's like, you know, this has been around for a really long time.
Yep.
So to me, just that, seeing all those Bibles, it really spoke to me. I'm like, you know, with this being around for so long, reaching so many people across the world, it's kind of hard to deny when it's in your face. That museum, it speaks to you when you go through it.
Yeah.
It's really nice.
Yeah. You know, when it comes to the validity of the Bible, that's a whole nother topic. And, you know, we can talk for hours on that. There's books written on that. I want to say this, when it comes to faith, you know, science, philosophy, our human intellect, the experiences that we have, all these different types of human things, the tangible things, they will never prove faith. Even when we look at world religions, all these kinds of things, they will never prove faith. But science, philosophy, intellect, experiences, all those things can support and strengthen our faith, which I think is a big distinction to make, because everyone tries to, it's so easy for us in our brains to say, I want to prove my faith. Well, no one's ever going to do that, or you wouldn't have to have faith. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But we use things to support and strengthen our faith. So I think the key to faith isn't to create this airtight case where we can bring it into a courtroom and prove what we believe, because no one's ever going to do that fully. There's always going to be something that's intangible, something that we can't see or experience. But the key to faith is not to create an airtight case, but to use the knowledge that we have to choose a reasonable faith. And I think, you know, that's where a lot of people have landed. And no matter what they believe, I respect people who have done their research and done their due diligence and then landed on something, even if it's something that I don't believe to be true. At least you did your due diligence. I remember this conversation that I had, you know, back when I was in the Air Force, especially as an instructor. Here I am as a technical sergeant, and I have all these, you know, airmen in my classroom. So one of the big no-nos was to ever push your own beliefs, or especially religious beliefs, onto people you outrank.
Yeah.
That's a huge no-no in the military. But, you know, we had some downtime one day, and it was like the perfect storm. I had an atheist, a Christian, a Mormon, a Jew. I think that's it. All in the same class. And they're all talking and sharing their ideas and perspectives on the world. And I'm just listening to them talk. And every single one of them were sharing, like, you know, the key talking points from each of their worldviews, each of their faiths. But at the end of the day, they really didn't know what they were talking about. There were holes in everything they were saying. It was just all over the place. And eventually I couldn't contain myself any longer. I was like, hey guys, you know what? Here's the thing, guys. I'm not gonna share with you what I believe, and I made sure I put that out there.
Yeah.
I was like, but here's what I would encourage you guys to do. Everything that each one of you are saying has so many holes in it, and, like, you know, from the Mormon to the Jewish guy to the Christian guy, everyone was saying things that didn't make sense and really didn't hold to their actual worldview, what they claimed their faith was. And I was like, you guys, you know, when it comes to matters of what your life is going to be defined by, or for someone who actually believes there's an afterlife and you're basing your life off of your belief, you know, what I would encourage you to do is to actually do your due diligence to see what a reasonable faith would actually look like, and to know to really truly know what you believe and be confident in that. Not just throw out some little token ideas and things, little talking points, like actually know what you believe. That way you have a foundation to stand on when something in life eventually rocks you, because something will rock your faith at some point.
Yeah, I think that's really important because with today's world, we have social media and it's easy to get bits and pieces
Yeah.
of different beliefs or ideas and then hold on to those like little gold nuggets as like, oh,
Yeah.
this really can make sense. But in reality, as a whole, of having an identity with your belief, it might not make sense, especially depending on what you're believing in.
Yeah.
And so I had a conversation recently about identity and Christianity and solidifying that. And I think that what you're saying with being able to have a reasonable faith, I think that's completely valid. And I think that's great advice for anybody to take with them. Just if you're able to, you know, when something rocks, you know, just like how you were explaining that situation
Yeah.
and those little holes,
Yeah.
I think that's important to be able to figure out before.
Yeah. And I think you hit on a great point. You know, there's so much information being shared in our culture that our brains, I mean, I'm sure you know this from your studies, but our brains are not made to absorb as much information as we see and intake every day. It's in fact, I'm pretty sure there's studies that have been done, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's why we see so much increase in things like anxiety, because there's so much being shared with us. And it's so easy to think that if it sounds good, it must be true.
Yeah.
And that's why before we dive into all the information, we actually have to have a foundation. What's our foundation built on? What is our truth? And our truth can't be something that we just conjure up and develop in ourselves. It has to be something that's higher than our own reasoning, because if we're perfectly honest with ourselves, we don't know a whole lot. We think we do.
Yeah.
But when we really step back, humans do not know a whole lot.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. So when it comes down to having conversations or just a conversation within ourselves, why is it sometimes really hard to have faith in God?
I mean, there's a lot of reasons, you know, without trying to get too deep into, you know, theology and stuff. One of the things that I've learned and have looked at a lot is, you know, in the Bible, and, you know, I know some of your listeners aren't Christians, but in the Bible, it describes, you know, in the beginning, the fall of mankind. So basically the story is summed up like this, that God created the world. He created everything to be perfect. He created people to be in his image, which was perfection. But at the same time, God wanted relationship. He wanted relationship. He wanted this exchange of love. And so in his creation, he created this thing called free will in people, so they could choose to love and to worship God. And so this, you know, here you got Adam and Eve, the first two people living in this perfect place, and they have this thing that you know, everything is available to them in the entire world. They have perfect fellowship with God. They have perfection in the world. But there's this one thing that God says, there's this tree of knowledge of good and evil. Just don't touch that and everything's good, you know? Don't touch that. So what happens? Temptation comes along, you know? Our enemy comes along, the serpent comes along, and he tempts Adam and Eve. And what I think is interesting is when Adam and Eve actually go to take part of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, a lot of people say that disobedience was the first sin. And it's like, yes, it is. But I think deeper than the disobedience was the desire to know and be like God. This desire to have God-like knowledge. And really that's what the whole tree represents, the knowledge of good and evil. And basically, so ever since then, you know, part of the curse, part of our fallen nature is that we're always trying to figure things out. And we want to, and there's this constant battle inside of us of trying to exalt ourselves above God, we find other things to worship. We worship ourselves, pride and selfishness. And so, we got this thing operating inside of us all the time. It's like, I'm going to figure it out, especially in like an Americanized culture. It's like, man, I'm my own person. I'm strong. I'm independent. Yay. And it's like, that's not the God way, though. The God way is dependence on God. It's surrender. It's living a life of humility, which are things that are very countercultural, very counter human nature. And so I think that, that's a brief summary of why people as a whole have a hard time having faith in God and really having faith in anything outside of our own intellect and our own, desires.
Yeah.
So.
I love that explanation. That's really good. So, a lot of the times, and I know from just talking to other people and personal experience, when we pray, sometimes if we feel like God hasn't answered our prayer in the way that we thought or the way that we think it should be answered,
Yeah.
a little faith or it's either lost or it's challenged.
Yeah.
And you start thinking, why? And I think that's a hard question. So
Yeah.
with him not answering prayers in the way that we would like, how does that challenge our faith?
Yeah. No, that's a big one. And for myself and for a lot of people, I know that for myself, part of my faith journey has been learning a different perspective, first starting with like what prayer is and isn't. And I used to think that prayer was this whole thing of getting from God, but really prayer is more about relating to. And so it's not getting from, it's more for relating to. And so prayer in and of itself is a wonderful gift that we get to talk to and relate to the creator of the universe through the Holy Spirit that's inside of us. And it's so easy to take the beauty of that and the grandeur of that and like minimize it down into this, this exchange, almost like this bartering system that we got going on with God. Like, hey, God, if I do some good stuff, or hey, I did this kind of stuff and now I have this prayer and I'm saying it the right way and I'm doing the right things. And so we almost place this expectation of God. And a lot of times it's subconsciously, that we, and this is a lot of what I'm about to say has to do with our church background, how we've been taught. And a lot of it has to do with our American culture. We're very materialistic.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times our view of God is that he's more like Santa Claus or a magic genie. And, we feel like, oh, well, we just got to stay off the naughty list. Or, hey, we only got a certain amount of things we can ask for from God. We only got those 3 wishes, so you better make good use of them. And we don't say that out loud, but deep down, a lot of times we have this like warped view of God's character and his heart for us. And we think that if we do good, that he owes us. And really going back to, what I was talking about with the fall, that's, when Adam and Eve first sinned and they were cursed and sent out of the garden, the first thing that happened after they sinned is that God came the next day to walk with them in the morning. Like he said, he walked with them daily in the garden, this beautiful picture of intimacy with God. And the first thing that enters into the human condition is shame. That instead of being out there and available for God, they realized their nakedness and they sewed some fig leaves together and they hid from God. And so that shame, shame has a weird way of operating in our lives that causes us to feel like we need to now appease something, or there's this tit for tat, this, eye for an eye, and this exchange system, and we do it with each other. And a lot of it is natural. I mean, a lot of it is just the world we live in now that, a lot of people believe in things like karma, you do good things and good things will come around back to you. Mm-hmm. Well, there's an element of truth to that a lot of times if you do good things, you'll get good things in return. But we know that's not always true.
Yeah.
Because then why do we see good things happen to bad people I say that in quotations, and bad things happen to quote unquote good people, because in our minds there's something that's off. The way that we were created to be got messed up through our decision to exalt ourselves over God. So I think that this thing that's operating inside of us, this feeling that if I do good, I'll get good in return, then we project that on God. And then we come to him with prayers, and we ask him for things. And here's the thing. God wants us to ask for things. He tells us to come to him, pray with all thanksgiving and supplication. And it talks about that in his word. So he wants to hear requests. But here's the thing too, is that God is perfectly wise. He's all knowing. And here's the analogy that I think of a lot. I got 4 kids, and they ask me for a lot of stuff. And I would be an absolute fool of a father to give them everything they asked for.
Yeah.
Because if I gave them everything they asked for and their limited understanding of what life is all about, then, they would grow up and they'd be unhealthy. They'd probably be obese. They'd be spoiled brats, and they'd be mean to everybody. And we know that as parents, but somehow when we become adults, it's like, oh, now I've arrived. I understand what life is all about. And we have a hard time accepting the fact that there's a God of the universe who just, his knowledge far surpasses ours. In fact, the Bible says the wisest things of people, the wisdom of men, is foolishness with God. That's what level we're on. God's foolishness, if there is really such a thing as the foolishness of God, that's as smart as we can be as human beings. So, God knows what's best for us, and he knows what we need and what we don't need. And if he were to answer all prayers, it would not be good. Have you ever seen that movie Bruce Almighty?
Yes.
With Jim Carrey?
Yeah.
Remember that part of the movie? It's like, I thought it was so good, and like Hollywood, wow, you did a great job personifying something. But he started answering yes to all the prayers. He just got late. He got God's powers, and he's like, oh my gosh, there's so many prayer requests. Forget this. I'm not taking time to read all these. And he starts typing really fast and answering yes. And all these crazy things start happening because people start getting everything they want, and it actually turns out to be a huge mess.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting, really, when you think about it, that if God really answered all our prayers, would we be better off?
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy. I'm definitely going to steal that from you, because I think it's something that's relatable, and especially for parents having kids.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some parents that give their kids everything, but for the most part, I think that that's not true. And so being able to realize that you are a parent of your kids,
Yeah.
but also you have a father, and
Yep.
that father knows best for you. And we really do have a limited knowledge
Yep.
on what's best
Yep.
for us. And so that explains it perfectly as far as
Yeah.
answering prayers, because we really don't know.
Yeah. And can I say one last thing on that too?
Yeah, of course.
So another thing, this is a really hard thing to really imbibe as a thought process, because it's so counter our nature, but it's so true. This is still something I'm on a journey on. I'm still trying to really program this into my natural thinking. It's this, that God doesn't owe me anything. God does not owe me anything. In fact, I'm the one that owes him everything. Without him sending Jesus to die on the cross for my sins, for the sins of the world, I would have no hope. So it wouldn't matter if he gave me everything I wanted or not. I would ultimately have no hope. I would die and be separated from God forever. And so that's like one of those core things. Like, we can talk about all the other, why God may or may not answer prayers, but at the end of the day, what is our attitude towards God? Is it wanting more out of him when he's already given us his best in Jesus? Or and realizing that, God, you're not the one who owes me anything. I owe you everything. So what do you want from me? Not what do I want from you? It's a big deal. It's not easy. It's not easy to have that thought process going on all the time.
Yeah, that having the right attitude, that's a great thought to think about, because especially for me, coming for someone who didn't grow up knowing any type of religion, I think so. My dad sent me to a church when I was probably maybe 12 or 13 years old
Okay.
to do a class it was a True Love Weights class.
Okay.
And I'm from California.
Yeah.
And it was one of his friends' church, which I'm really grateful for. It was a great experience, but it was African American church. So I was really the only white person.
Okay.
And it was my only experience really for church at all. So, I mean, everyone was very welcoming. It was great, but I've never been taught or really experienced until I was a young adult what type of attitude I should have towards God or to know God at all.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to have as a part of our foundation.
Yeah.
Because if we don't start off with a strong foundation and having that attitude, then everything else gets warped. Then those little things of questioning, why is God doing this to me, or my prayer's not getting answered, those are really easy to have overwhelm you and overcome you because that foundation isn't there. So I would definitely put the attitude in the foundation part.
Yes, I agree.
And to kind of piggyback off of that,
Sure.
When people are not having their prayers answered, sometimes they end up being upset with God. And it could be for several, reasons. I know that especially people who have lost or traumatic things happen.
Yeah.
But just to go from praying to God, this person that you believe in, someone that's you believe to be there for you, and then not having your prayer answered and you become upset.
Yeah.
What would you say as a pastor? What would you say to somebody who is upset with God?
It's so difficult. It's like a lot of times it's one of those in the moment things. Honestly, if I was, in my position and someone came to me for advice, counsel, whatever, and they're straight up like, I'm angry with God. I would have to really in the moment kind of filter through some things. I think the biggest filter is what type of relationship I have with them. Do I know this person well or don't I?
Yeah.
If it's a person I don't know well and I don't know a lot about their story, it's going to be a mostly empathy driven conversation. And I say conversation lightly because there'd probably be a lot of them talking. I just try to get them to talk. Now, if it was someone I knew really well and I knew their story, I knew their history, yes, I would want to sit there with them and empathize with them as best as I can and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, if it was someone I was a little bit closer to, I would definitely challenge them just with some of the things that we've already talked about, things like perspective, things, truth of God's character, bringing them back to foundational things. Because a lot of times when we're upset with God, especially if you're a well-intentioned person who believes in God, who believes in Jesus, you have a relationship with Jesus, a lot of times when we feel upset with God, it's really just because we've lost sight of some of our foundational things. And sometimes we just need to be reminded by it, and that's why good relationships are so important. We're going to become who we're closest to. And so if you're upset with God and you go to someone who doesn't believe in God, or they're upset with God with you, it's probably not going to be super beneficial. It's just going to be someone who they don't try to pull you up out of the muck. They just jump into the muck with you and splash around. And we don't need that. we don't need that. So all that to say, it's hard to know what exactly I would say. And like when I have a conversation with someone like that, it's like I said, it's normally very in the moment. I feel like a lot of times it's very spirit led, very instincts, intuition led. And it's difficult. It's conversations with people that are going through real stuff. It's never easy. And if someone were to say that they have those kinds of conversations figured out, or those conversations are easy, or they like those conversations, I'd be skeptical of them.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's the best I have for you there. I don't know if that kind of gives you
it does.
picture.
I think it's great advice, because being able to realize that if someone's upset with God, then I would assume that they have a relationship or they have some sort of belief. And then just to remind yourself of the foundations, but also what you said about reminding yourself of who you're surrounding yourself by.
Yeah.
I think that's huge. So I thought that was great.
Yeah.
With one of the biggest things that I personally struggled with, so this is more of a vulnerable topic, is traumatic things happening in someone's life,
Yeah.
and you lose faith. So a little bit more background on me, and I don't know if people would relate or not, but as far as not growing up in a church, my dad is a recovering addict, and he did go to Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous. So they do believe in a 12-step program,
Mm-hmm.
and that is admitting that there's a higher power. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of childhood I spent in NA and AA meetings, which is completely unconventional, but it's my only exposure to a higher power
It's interesting.
was that. And so I didn't have like zero foundation. I didn't really know what to expect or what to believe, and I kind of had this idea of like a supernatural God that has the ability to take me out of a difficult situation.
Yeah.
So in high school, I was sexually assaulted, and
wow.
it was in that it was, I remember specifically, just to build a visual, I had my True Love Waits ring on from that class that my dad sent me to. And I was just like toggling it, like, round and round. And in my head, I was like, just please get me out of this situation. Like, make me disappear. Like a supernatural, like, come down from the sky with your, like, rays and just get me out of here. And that didn't happen. And I lost a lot of faith. And I know that it's a lot because I didn't have a good foundation. I didn't know what to expect. But because not having those core, Bible studies and things to believe on, and necessarily a family to lean back on, it kind of put me in a rut until my young adulthood. And so for people who go through like traumatic things, as far as like losing a child or things that make you question like why, like why were you not there for me? How do you help somebody come back to faith or to realize? I know this is a little tough question, so I'm trying to word it right.
It is.
So what's the best way to keep faith and believing that all of this is happening for a reason?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, like hearing about your experiences and knowing the experiences of so many people, so many stories, there's so much pain and suffering in the world. And this is one of those questions and one of those topics that are like the big ones. This is like a make or break discussion for a lot of people. And this is where a lot of people get hung up. And, the first thing that I would say to you or to other people is first of all, God did not want that to happen. That's not in God's plan. God's plan for this world was broken. And it's when traumatic things like that happen, there really is no good answer. There really isn't. And I think a lot of times Christians or even other religious people, we try to come up with answers. And a lot of times I think it's to soothe pain and to help us cope with our reality. But really, honestly, a lot of the things that we say and think just fall short. They really don't take a wrong and make it right again. You know what I mean? And even the phrase in the question that you asked, you said everything happening for a reason. Even that phrase I kind of struggle with because, a lot of Christians say that kind of stuff to help people who have been through difficulty or who are experiencing difficulty. And I think that phrase has actually caused a lot of people more confusion and pain because then they start having this whole thing going on. Well, then what's the reason? And why would God have to, if he's trying to teach me a lesson, why would he why would he use something like that to teach me a lesson? Couldn't he have used something that
Yeah.
was less painful? And it starts this whole thing of trying to figure out an answer or a reason that may or may not be there. Some people live their whole life and they never get a reason for their pain or suffering. Some people do. Some people would get a chance to go through something difficult, and then circumstance happens down the road and it's like, oh, wow, if I would have never gone through that pain, then I have never been able to do this or help this person. And it's like, yeah, those things happen, but it's not 100% across the board. So that's, if you're talking about why does God allow pain and suffering, or how do I keep my faith even though I've suffered, it's like that really is an answer that just falls short, and it just
Yeah.
lacks substance at the end of the day. And you know, sadly and regrettably, part of living in a fallen, broken world is that there's going to be pain and there's going to be suffering. The Bible talks about how things that are good, rain down on the just and the unjust, and then there's things that are evil and things that are bad that rain down on the just and the unjust, meaning that good things happen to good people, bad things happen to good people, and vice versa with people who don't live their lives well. And there doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason to it, and it can be very frustrating if you take a look, if you try to look closely at it and explain it in human terms and human reasoning. It just always hits a dead end with our intellect.
Yeah.
So I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that it really resonated with me when you said that a lot of people use everything happens for a reason to soothe.
Yeah.
Because I've even said that.
Yeah.
I've even said that recently to my dad. And I think it's kind of like a loss for words. You really want to console this person.
Yes.
And you want them to know that they're going to be okay. And I think that's the whole point of everything happens for a reason, is it's going to be okay.
Yes.
But I think as Christians, I think it's good to, and I'm definitely going to take this with me and remember it, is that we are in a broken world and God didn't want this. And I think that that's a way better answer than everything happens for a reason, because you're completely right. It does lead you in this rabbit hole of chasing a reason, because that was totally me. I was in a rabbit hole and I'm like, like, why? And that's not satisfying, and it leads to more pain than it does than knowing that we have a loving God and that this is not what he wanted, but we're in a broken world. So I guess my follow-up question for this is, living in a broken world and God not wanting this, how do you, I don't want to say like, how does this get better, but
how does it resolve itself, kind of?
Yeah, how does it resolve itself?
At least for us, as best we can do. Well, first off, even though there may not be a reason for everything, I do fully believe that every single situation in a believer's life, that it can be redeemed, meaning it can be, the results of it, the fallout from it can be made into something beautiful, and that God he makes beauty from ashes. And that is something that I do see in people's lives repeatedly. So, you may not ever be able to look back at, the circumstance that happened to you and say, oh, there's a reason for it. But the thing is that shaped you and that marked you in a way it didn't for other people. So did God want that to happen to you for a reason? No, I don't believe that at all. But if you were willing, can God take that and use it and allow you to do something beautiful from that and make something beautiful from that? I fully believe that you can take that circumstance and through God's power, almost like reverse the curse and not let that define you. And then you can, in fact, use what you've learned and what you've experienced and how you've grown to then bless other people. That's how God redeems things. So I think it's just an important way to label things. Like, I think words are very important. What we actually say about something and define something, it's going to shape how we think about it. So instead of saying there's a reason, say, I don't know what the reason is, but I believe that God can redeem this, or I believe that God can make something out of this and use it for his glory. And that's just a very important distinction to make.
Yeah. I love that because a big thing that I say a lot is turn your pain into purpose, because that's what I learned to do. And so I think that after this conversation, like my personal takeaway is that, God didn't want this, but he made something beautiful out of it. And to me, that's why I am in graduate school, to become a counselor,
Yeah.
to be able to be relatable. And the phrase that you used, it was really beautiful, that you are marked in other ways that other people aren't.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful phrase. And I think even using that with people, another thing I'm going to steal from you.
Go for it. We all have a story. At the end of the day, we all have a story, and all of us experience different things, and we go through the ups and downs of life. And it's the commonality of the human experience, and how we reconcile it, how we resolve it in our minds. Last thing I'll say on this is just an amazing thing. I don't know if you've ever heard of a pastor named Tim Keller.
I haven't.
You should check out some of his stuff. He's just a great preacher. Just makes topics very tangible and accessible for a lot of people. But one thing he said in his book called The Reason for God, he was breaking down this whole thing of like human pain and suffering and why does it happen, and it's just such a big thing for so many people. And he goes, I don't know what the reason is. Nobody does. I don't know what the reason is, but I know what the reason is not. The reason is not because he doesn't care or that he's indifferent to humanity. Because here's the thing: if God would truly, if he didn't care, or if there was something that God can swoop in and do to like just eradicate all evil from the world, and right now we're like how we live in the world we live in, if that was his intent, then he would have never sent his son Jesus into the world to be exposed to the human condition, to human reality. I mean, Jesus, he lived a life that was marked by poverty, that was marked by rejection, that was marked by betrayal, that was marked by beating, that was marked by being exposed to an unjust trial and an unjust governmental system. And then he ultimately suffered a horrible, torturous death and then was separated from his Father. God would have never done that if he didn't care. He showed that he cares about our suffering, that he empathizes with our suffering, because he actually made himself into, allowed himself to enter into the human condition in Jesus to experience what we experience. And I just find a lot of peace, a lot of consolation in that we don't worship a God or serve a savior in Jesus that is completely ambivalent and distant from our human condition of suffering. Like, he entered into it with us. And so he understands. He's right there with us through the things. So even though it may not be that the things disappear and they're gone, he's right there with us, and he empathizes with us the whole way. And he created a way for us to have hope despite the pain and suffering. And so our eyes are set on something greater, not on the things of this world. And it just brings a lot of peace,
Yeah, it really does. Because I think a lot of the time we might think that, I think it's easy to forget that God has suffered too, and that he is able to empathize with us. And that's something that doesn't cross my mind often, as far as, so when you're in a difficult situation, like all the things that we talked about today, and suffering and questioning faith, I think it's even easier to think, oh, God doesn't understand.
Yeah.
But really, he does.
Yes.
Very much so, and on so many different levels. I'll definitely have to check out that book. It sounds like a great book, and I love relatable things. So
same here.
I'm excited to check him out as an author. So I want to end today on a positive note. So do you have any last words or inspiration or last thoughts about today's topic?
Yeah. So one thing I would say to, if you have anyone that listens to this who they would call themselves a believer, to not don't don't stop short with how you pursue God. Don't settle for the status quo. Don't settle for a surface level faith and a surface level relationship with God. Like go deep with Him. Go all in with Jesus. I find that the closer I get to Jesus and the more I surrender to Him, the more my faith is built up, because there's something that happens inside of us. Faith is activated, faith is built up the more that we surrender, the more that we lay ourselves down before God. And it's counterintuitive, it doesn't feel natural, but I mean it happens over and over again. We see it in God's word. We see it with people when we talk with them about their own experiences of growing in faith. So don't settle for just the status quo, Americanized Christianity. Get in your word, get to know God better, get yourself around some good people who are pursuing Jesus along with you, and just keep growing. And then if you got someone listening today that maybe they don't feel like they have any faith, or they have major questions about religion or Christianity, the God of the Bible. There's a verse, actually, I referenced Hebrews 11:1 earlier in the podcast. And just a few verses below that, in verse 6, it says, "Without faith, it's impossible to please God. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that He exists," and get this phrase, that He rewards those who seek Him. And I can tell you this: if you're struggling with faith, if you have doubts, if you have questions, if you will seek God, He will show Himself to you. So don't just, almost the same that I challenge Christians to challenge a non-believer, is don't settle. Don't settle. Keep on seeking God, seek truth, and you'll find it. If you seek it, you will find it. I firmly believe that. So that's kind of what I got there to end.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much for sitting down with me and discussing it. I love
My
this
pleasure.
conversation.
Yeah, thanks. It was great.